Build and get 这两个动词是你能学好中文的关键。If you're studying Chinese, you always want to be asking yourself, is what I'm doing either building comprehension or getting comprehensible input? That's it, because language acquisition only requires you to do one thing: get the message. You need to either go find more messages, as in the literal term of go get it, or get it as in understand. You need to understand what somebody is saying, and the more comprehensible messages you get, the faster you will acquire language. So technically speaking, that's it. But it's not very helpful because you can't get anything at the beginning. There's not a single understandable message you can get before you've at least built some comprehension. That's why you need to be engaging either in building or getting. Those are the only two activities. But before we get into that, let me talk about what we're going to cover in this video so you know how you're going to benefit. So first, what builds comprehension when you don't understand anything in Chinese? What activities will build comprehension? Then, what activities can you do to get as many messages as possible? And then 3, how to follow a path that ensures that you build comprehension and get understandable messages like a pro. So I'd like you to start off by imagining nodes in a network. So big nodes where electricity flows through it, kind of like a neural network in your brain. And it is from that metaphor that you can think about this. Think of the building comprehension part as constructing nodes. And the getting side is electricity connecting those nodes through the network. Nodes without connection stand alone and aren't very powerful, but on the other hand, electricity without any nodes to grasp onto just dissipates and goes nowhere. So this metaphor is perfect because I think this is how our brain actually works in terms of neurons and then the axon that sends signals from one neuron to the next. So let's start off by answering the question, what do I need to do to build comprehension in Mandarin Chinese? There are 4 primary ways that you can build comprehension before you can understand any messages. So we're talking about starting from 0. If I were going to go learn Arabic today, I know literally nothing in Arabic, so I would need to do these 4 activities if I wanted to get there, and this is what you should do with Chinese. 1. Learn how to pronounce the syllables of the language. 2. Memorize Chinese characters. 3. Memorize Chinese words. And 4. Read about Chinese grammar rules. These are the 4 activities that you're going to engage in before you understand anything. Let's go through each of these one by one, starting with learn how to pronounce syllables. Pronouncing syllables is huge for building comprehension because each syllable that you can be certain that you understand how to produce allows you to hear and comprehend it. If you know how to produce a sound, then when you hear somebody else producing that same sound, it becomes possible to comprehend it. Now, it's not enough. You have to know what the sound means, so you have to learn characters and words, which we'll get to, but this is undeniably a building activity. It's amazing how well you can hear sounds that you know how to produce yourself. And luckily, there are only 420 independent syllables in Mandarin Chinese, not including tones. So you can absolutely master it. In fact, Luke made a video that I'll link above that is all about how to master every syllable in the language. So you can do this much more expediently than you can in many other languages. The next step is to start memorizing Chinese characters. Now, you shouldn't start doing this until you understand how to pronounce every sound, because how to memorize a Chinese character is heavily influenced by your understanding of its pronunciation and its syllable. So this is a building activity, though, because you haven't reached a full message when you learn a character. It's comparable to learning a letter of the alphabet. It's not exactly the same, but can you read English while not knowing what the letter D means? Well, no, it's going to be a real challenge. But on the other hand, is learning the letter D enough? Also no. Still, I'm sure that you can see that it's evident that you can't get any comprehensible input through reading if you don't build characters. So, it's a building activity. Additionally, you can also improve your listening comprehension the more you read. So building your knowledge of characters pays off in more than one way. Now, this video is focused on what you need to do. If you want to know how to master Chinese characters, we made a video all about it, which you can see linked on the screen now, called Master Chinese Characters. It's a really excellent technique, and it allows you to learn a character in 30 seconds to a minute. So check that out if you're interested. The next step towards building comprehension is to memorize Chinese words, but only attempt attempt to memorize words that contain characters you've already memorized in the previous step. So sometimes, though, people are a little bit confused about this distinction we're making, between characters and words. They're like, aren't characters and words the same thing? And I remember I used to think that when I first started learning Chinese. However, most Chinese words are made up of 2 characters. Some words are only 1 character, and those are the ancient words like person or walk or water, things like that. And then there's a percentage that are 3 and 4 characters, whether they're idioms or things like that. But in modern Chinese, percentage-wise, the vast majority are 2 characters. Therefore, when building comprehension, you must focus on the top 500 most frequent 2-character words of the language. Why 500 words? Why not 1,000? Why not 2,000? Well, it's because those 500 most frequent words are 80% of the language by frequency. And so it's that Pareto principle thing. 20% of the effort gets you 80% of the results. So imagine it like this. In a 1,000 word article, 800 of the words in that article are going to be the most frequent 500 words in the language. So you get a lot of bang for your buck for learning these words first. However, this is still a building comprehension behavior and not a getting comprehensible input, because there's no full message in a single word. You need to string a few words together into a sentence before getting that comprehensible input in Chinese. So that's what to do in step 3, memorize those 500 words. If you want to know how to do it, we made a video about that too, which you linked here. It's about how to learn words using a technique we call living links. So check out that video if you're interested. The 4th step here is to read about Chinese grammar rules, but big caveat here. You will not, I repeat, will not acquire grammar by reading about grammar rules. Instead, reading about grammar rules will help you spot some patterns when you are getting comprehensible input. Therefore, it falls into the category of building comprehension, but it's only through getting comprehensible input that you will be able to acquire a feeling for grammar, which is what you actually want. You don't want to spend too much time thinking about how the language is structured, because that's in the realm of linguistics, not in the realm of language acquisition. So you want to spend very little time on this activity compared to the others. But speaking of, that's something we should go over. How should I divide my time between these 4 activities? Now, of course, this isn't an exact science, but here's my best advice. Building pronunciation, 5% of your time. Building characters, 85% of your time. Building words, 9 to 10% of your time. And reading about grammar, less than 1% of your time. So let me go into why. Building pronunciation, 5% of your time, because in other languages you'd spend way more time on pronunciation, but since Chinese pronunciation is far more limited than most languages, it requires less time overall. It's just a fact of the matter. And we actually have a course called Pronunciation Mastery that goes over everything in 8 hours, and you'll have all of it down completely within 8 hours. So you can check that out on our website, mandarinblueprint.com, if you're interested. But 5% of your time total, and it's also front-loaded. You do that first. It's the very first thing you do. Now, building characters is 85% of your time. Nothing is more important than mastering characters when it comes to Chinese comprehension building. Each character, especially the top 3,000 by frequency, has a multitude of connections to the different layers of the language. So remember that nodes and network idea I was talking about? A character is better than anything else at giving a node for electricity to pass to different parts of the language. And you're building a machine in your mind that should be able to express itself because it's had so much understanding. A character is one of the best ways to build that understanding. They're absolutely essential to master, and there's a lot of them. That's why you spend 85% of your time building comprehension here. Now, building words is about 9 to 10% of your time. You might wonder why you'd only spend 9 to 10% of your time learning words. After all, there are a lot of words, right? But there's a simple answer. You can start learning words in the context of comprehensible input much more quickly than you could individual characters. So long as you correctly memorize the characters, learning words gets easier and easier the more skill you acquire. Therefore, you only need to build comprehension via word memorization for the top 500. After that, you can learn a word directly by seeing it in a sentence, or you can just look at the 2 characters of the word and go, oh, that's obvious what that means. Chinese is full of that. So for example, you know that the character huo means fire. You know that the character te means car. And then you go, okay, fire car, huo te, oh, that means train, because trains used to run on coal and that was how they ran. So, and then you go, oh, add in the character 站, which I know means station, 火车站. Right? Wow. Okay, that's really easy to understand. So I didn't even need to memorize the word specifically because I already knew the characters. So this is why building words requires less of your time overall. Now, finally, you spend less than 1% of your time reading about grammar. And there's really no need to focus too much on this. If you never read about grammar rules, you would still succeed in reaching fluency and literacy. The only reason we encourage it a little bit is twofold. One, there's some evidence that reading about grammar rules can help build comprehension. And two, it can be satisfying to wrap your brain around the why of grammar, even though it doesn't help too much with the how. Katsumoto of All Japanese All the Time said it best. Learning grammar rules is like taking pharmaceutical drugs. Healthy if done sparingly, but lethal in large doses. Focusing too much on the rules can cause you to think too much when you're speaking, because you're like, am I putting the noun in front of the verb in the right way, and where does this character go in the sentence? And then the next thing you know, you're thinking in terms of math formulas of grammar in your head, as opposed to just speaking off the cuff and naturally. So you want to make sure you don't spend too much time here, otherwise you can end up actually hurting yourself. So those are the 4 activities that help you build comprehension in Chinese before you know anything, and then also how much time to spend on each one. Now there is a 5th comprehension building activity, which is getting comprehensible input itself. The more comprehensible input you get, the better you build your comprehension, but the 4 activities above are what you do when you can't understand anything yet. In part 1, I discussed what to do to build comprehension so that you can look at a message and get it, understand it, because we acquire language in one way and only one way, by understanding messages, which is a quote from Dr. Stephen Krashen, the famous linguist. But here's the thing. It's not obvious what to do to get as many messages as possible, especially when you're still in that building phase. So here we go. What to do to get as many messages as possible in Mandarin Chinese. Now there's 2 stages to this. Stage 1 is while you're still learning characters, because it's not practical to learn over 3,000 characters before you start getting any messages, right? That's one of the things you could do. You could imagine in some scenario that you built all of the things you needed to build. You built all the pronunciation, you built all of the characters, you memorized those top 500 words, and then you start getting comprehensible input. Well, that's going to take you a really long time, and you won't technically have acquired any language, really. You will have just built a bunch of bricks in a brickyard without actually putting together a house. So start with simple sentences while you're still learning characters. So sentences are the shortest messages you can get, so it's a good place to start. But that said, only read sentences made up of characters and words that you already know. It's okay if there's maybe one word that you don't know, so long as a sentence is sufficiently long. But if you try to read or listen to sentences with too many unknown characters,
you're gonna have a bad time.
It's critical to only attempt to understand messages that closely relate to what you already know to avoid a feeling of overwhelm and burnout. So try to imagine it like this. Imagine a sphere submerged in a sea of knowledge, and the sphere is what you know, and the sea is everything you don't know. If you're imagining this sphere, it's far easier to expand to the areas just outside of the sphere than to attempt to understand something many leagues away in the sea of the unknown. Now you might be asking, how do I find sentences that align with what I've already learned? And that's a great question, and I will get to that at a later point. For now though, let's talk about what you do after sentences, which is that you graduate to paragraphs. It's easy to forget that grammar exists on more than one level. We tend to think of grammar as just being on the sentence level, like this is how a sentence structure works in a certain language. But grammar exists on several different levels. It exists on the level of a paragraph, on the level of a chapter, on the level of a story, right? A story doesn't make sense if you put the conclusion second and the opening monologue sixth and center point last, right? It has to have a certain order to it. And so that's why you want to graduate from simple sentences into paragraphs, because that will help you build comprehension through comprehensible input on a higher level. Now, singular sentences can't deliver as much nuance as I've just explained, but at this stage, you're not really ready to read novels, after you've just gone from simple sentences. When you go up to paragraphs, don't just jump to Moby Dick, okay? Go to like a 5 to 10 sentence paragraph. That probably will work pretty well. But again, they need to be made up of characters and words you already know. There's an exception to this though, which we'll call a top-down word. A top-down word is a word that you haven't learned through character memorization or word building, right? When you read a whole paragraph, if there's one word you haven't seen before, you have a decent shot of understanding it because of the surrounding context of comprehensible input. So ideally, top-down words should be no more than 2% of the text, and they should be highlighted and defined. So after all, Chinese is not a phonetic language, so if you don't know the characters, you can't just read it like you would with an English word. You can't just sound it out. Now, once again, you might be asking something at this point in the video, like, hey, Phil, how the heck do I find paragraphs perfect for my level that have the top-down words highlighted and defined? And believe it or not, there is an answer to this, but I'll explain that a little bit later. Once you can start to read paragraphs with relative ease, it's time again to expand your context, because the longer the story is, the more you not only get messages, but also continue to build comprehension. I spent way too much time personally on individual sentences, and that was a mistake because sometimes you want to be able to use the context that surrounds a sentence to understand why it was said that way. Why did they omit this word? Why did they add this extra context? Why did they add this particular grammar particle? Well, it's because of the context they were in, which one sentence can only give you so much. You need a story to surround the idea. And the thing I'd like to get across here is that after you've started to get understandable messages, the process itself builds further comprehension. So it feeds into itself in a positive feedback loop. So at the beginning, when you know nothing, you have to build comprehension with the activities we talked about in part 1. Pronunciation, character memorization, word memorization, and a little bit of reading about grammar points. But once you get to the point where you're reading graded readers and you're getting full stories, it's very unlikely that you're going to fail, because you're not only acquiring the language, but you're also building comprehension for new things. And this positive feedback loop, it's like adding gasoline to a fire. And not only is this stage super efficient for language acquisition, it feels great. That's why you won't fail, because doing things that feel great requires very little excess discipline. Still though, be sure that the graded content that you're reading is at your level. Now at this point, you're probably starting to get a little bit annoyed with me because I haven't told you how to get comprehensible sentences. I haven't told you how to get comprehensible paragraphs, and I'm still telling you, hey, with your graded content, make sure it's at your level. I will explain how to do that. But first, I want to talk about what you should be doing once you do know enough characters. So everything we've been talking about so far is the activities you engage in to get comprehensible input while you're still in the process of building characters. Now, what do you do to get more comprehensible input after you know 3,000 characters? Well, the simple answer is just immerse. Turn your life into a Chinese person's life. Change your phone operating system to Chinese. Only listen to Mandarin language podcasts. Are you watching TV? Well, it should be something like 爱情公寓 or 黄皮子粉. These are all Chinese shows. The news in China has some dang standard Mandarin. Watch that and be wary of propaganda. Do you get the picture here? At this stage, your comprehension is higher than ever because you've learned all of these characters and pronunciations and whatever. So the only question you have to ask yourself is, what content do I love to consume? We don't need encouragement to do things we love, right? So the game becomes much simpler at this point. Search for content you love, like your life depended on it. Now, we've talked about immersion, and we've talked about how in stage 1 you're still learning characters, and in stage 2 it's after you've learned characters. So a natural question might be, can I immerse while I'm still learning characters? And of course the answer is yes, absolutely. Depending on your tolerance for listening to content you don't understand, you could start immersing on day 1. Just be aware that you're going to understand pretty much nothing, so you would have to have a fairly high tolerance for that. However, when you're immersing while you're still consciously building comprehension through character learning and pronunciation and all that stuff, you should have a system for capturing the words, characters, and phrases that you don't know. Now, we actually made a video all about immersion that I'll link to right here that gives you some great tools and techniques for getting the most out of your immersion content. Now we're going to head into part 3, where we talk about the how for all of this. In parts 1 and 2, I talked about the what. What are you supposed to do to build comprehension, and what do you do to get comprehensible input? In part 3, we're going to talk about the how. Let's go through all of it. Why, what, and how to acquire Chinese. Well, the why, that's in your heart. You're going to be the one who knows exactly why you want to learn Chinese. Maybe your spouse is Chinese, and that makes your why pretty dang clear. But what about the what? Well, that's what I covered in the build comprehension section and the get as many messages as possible section. So learning how to pronounce Chinese syllables, memorizing Chinese characters, memorizing Chinese words, reading about Chinese grammar rules, and then starting with sentences, graduating to paragraphs, going into graded readers, and then finding content you love and immersing it like your life depended on it. But how do we do all these things? So let's go through each of these one by one so we know about the how. So the how for pronouncing Chinese syllables. Anyone who joins the Mandarin Blueprint Method course gets our pronunciation mastery course for free. You can also get it as a standalone course, which we'll leave a link in the description for. But the biggest reason people struggle to master pronunciation is that they don't have a clear and concise explanation of precisely how to shape their mouth, tongue, and vocal cords. But luckily, we have Luke Neal, my business partner and good friend of mine. He is the man with the best pronunciation of a non-native speaker I've ever seen. I'm not joking about that. I've met many non-native speakers. His pronunciation is the best. The dude sounds incredible, and he explains how to shape your mouth, how to put your tongue, how to resonate the sounds from your vocal cords in your throat, mouth, and nasal cavities. Everything is super clear, and he's got a very lovely British accent as well. So you can see a video of him giving a summary of all these things, or you can get involved in pronunciation mastery. The reason why this is so important is because Chinese native speakers often do not know how to explain to a non-native speaker how to produce the sound. And remember what I said earlier? Knowing how to produce the sound is what makes you able to hear and comprehend it. So this is the best solution for the how of memorizing Chinese pronunciation. Watch that YouTube video to get a free version, or join the Mandarin Blueprint Method and get pronunciation mastery as a part of that. Now let's go into the how for memorizing Chinese characters. Again, we have a video called Master Chinese Characters, and it is available to get a free understanding of how this works. But if you want something that's really systemized, part of the Mandarin Blueprint Method course is what we call the Hanzi movie method. It's the most fun, effective, and efficient way to memorize Chinese characters available online today, because it utilizes the same techniques propagated by the world memory champions. So this is people like Dominic O'Brien or Alex Mullen. These are guys who have won major memory competitions to memorize random stuff that doesn't matter, like decks of cards or decimal places of pi. We apply these same techniques, but apply to the very meaningful thing of Chinese characters. It's highly useful. It's not just this random stuff that shows, hey, this guy's got a great memory. But why not apply those same techniques to learning something that is highly useful, like a Chinese character? And that also plays a major factor into how to memorize Chinese words. So because the Hanzi movie method allows for such efficient character learning, you can instantly move from learning a character to learning a high frequency word that uses it. For example, in the Mandarin Blueprint method, the 14th character you learn is nian, which is the Chinese word for year. Now later, at character number 48, you learn jin, which means today or present. So what a shocker, 今年 means this year. Chinese is way easier than you might realize if you know the characters. So now, not all Chinese words are quite so straightforward, so that's why we have that living links technique, and we made that video all about how you can learn 100 Chinese words in a day just by using these techniques. But we also cover that in great detail in phase 2 of the Mandarin Blueprint method. So living links is an expansion of the Hanzi movie method for learning individual characters, but because the Hanzi movie method is so effective at teaching characters, living links can therefore be less structured and a bit more improvisational. So again, the video to that technique for living links is in the description below. And by the way that we do it in the Mandarin Blueprint method is that we only teach you words that are made up of characters you already know. So the Hanzi movie method and living links work in tandem. Now, you'll remember I said that you need to get sentences that align with what you already know. Well, how do you do that? Well, when you only know 100 characters out of 3,000, how do you get sentences that fit those specifications? You can't. None of the Chinese sentence warehouses or dictionaries where you might be able to find sentences out there on the internet knows what you've already learned. But we do. If you use the Mandarin Blueprint method, we made the curriculum. We know exactly what you know, and so we can therefore tailor the sentences that come up to be exactly made up of the characters and components and words that you already know. And this is what we call OCLO, the optimal character learning order. And it's actually patent pending because it has such an incredible effect of giving you a build and get framework. You're building comprehension through character memorization and word memorization, and then you're getting comprehensible input by having sentences tailored to exactly what you already know. It's a great way to bounce between these two. And so I can't really stress enough how much of a game changer this is, because before, the only way to get literate in Chinese was to learn loads of characters first, search for sentences, and then hope you knew enough of the characters to be able to get the message. Now, you can start getting messages so much sooner than you ever thought was possible before. We do a thing called the Mandarin Blueprint Challenge, where we challenge you to learn 105 characters and 60 words so that you can start getting sentences, and there are people who do it in just a few days. We recommend that you do it over a period of 2 weeks, but we have some crazy people who do it in like 2 or 3 days, and they're getting comprehensible input with sentences made up of characters and words that do not require them to have pinyin. It's wild. So that's how you can get sentences that are made up of only characters and words you already know by using the Mandarin Blueprint method. And again, if you want to get a less expensive version of this that isn't the full Mandarin Blueprint package, you can take the Mandarin Blueprint Challenge for $7. So just head over to mandarinblueprint.com/challenge and you can see how we get you to literacy within just a couple of weeks. Now, how do you get paragraphs, graded readers, and grammar explanations? Well, I mentioned before the biggest mistake with my Chinese study regime was spending way too much time on individual sentences. And when you don't know very much, single sentences are ideal. They're not too complicated and they're made up of characters and words that you already know, which is great. But you shouldn't linger here too long. You have to expand the context. Well, in the Mandarin Blueprint method, we only show you paragraphs made up of sentences you've already understood. Are you starting to see the pattern here? Remember that sphere of expanding knowledge I was talking about? The Mandarin Blueprint method does this better than any other curriculum at expanding just beyond what you now know to expand that sphere of knowledge. Another word for this is called the zone of proximal development. And this is a key aspect of learning anything, really. So the new word that you're learning will fit nicely into a sentence that contains characters you already know. And hey, wouldn't you know it, that sentence fits into a paragraph that is a little story that you already know. And oh wait, that paragraph fits into a several paragraph story, and that becomes a longer graded reader. And this is all building from knowing one character to knowing 100 characters to knowing 500 characters. And by then, you also know loads of sentences and words and paragraphs and stories. And it all keeps building until you get to 3,000 characters, 11,800 words. You've read tens of thousands of sentences and read over 100 graded stories. And this is all built out in the Mandarin Blueprint method so that while you're still building comprehension through activities like learning characters and pronunciation, you are also getting loads of comprehensible input. This is that build and get frame that we have going there. And we even throw in grammar explanations when they are appropriate in the course. So that's that less than 1% of your time spending doing that. Well, you don't even need to plan that. We've planned it out for you already. So we've talked about the how for everything in stage 1 while you're still learning characters. But what about getting content you love through immersion? Nothing is better at building comprehension and getting you messages along the way than the Mandarin Blueprint method. But it builds what you can potentially understand to the point where you can consume native Chinese content. And that's where you're going to get great. You're going to get fluent and literate using the Mandarin Blueprint method, and then you're going to become excellent through your immersion in native Chinese content. That's going to be the point where you're absolutely impressing Chinese people and turning yourself into a highly marketable and amazing speaker of a supposed super difficult language, right? So the way that we teach this is through our Mandarin Immersion Masterclass. It gives you all the tools you need not only to capture interesting phrases, sentences, and audio from your favorite Chinese content, but more importantly, give you an ever-growing resource list to videos, TV shows, movies, books, comics, video games, podcasts, graded readers, and audiobooks. But if you don't want to do any kind of paid course like that, Like I said, we made a video all about how to do this, and it's a great summary. Even if you just watched only our free videos, you will be able to follow a path to get to fluency and literacy. So when you're watching what you love at this stage, where you've got immersion and you're just finding new content, that's something where you will be able to navigate on your own. You won't need help from something like Mandarin Blueprint anymore, because you'll be able to go through the Chinese internet and find that stuff that you love. So, the how. Reaching fluency and literacy in Mandarin Chinese. Well, whether or not you decide to enter our dojo and become a Mandarin Blueprint member, I hope that this video has reframed your perspective on Chinese acquisition. It's absolutely possible. If you follow our advice, it's probable. And if you stay consistent every day, it's inevitable. Thank you for watching this video about the build and get framework for acquiring Mandarin Chinese. I've mentioned a lot of other videos that we've done, whether it be how to pronounce Mandarin like a native, master Chinese characters, master Chinese words, or even how to immerse in Chinese, and the links for all of those are below in the description. But if you'd like to know about any new videos we put out, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Also, what are your thoughts on this framework for understanding how to acquire Mandarin Chinese? Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. 下次见.